Have you ever noticed that some people seem to walk into a room and change everything without saying a word? They don't shout. They don't beg. They don't argue. They simply pull back. And in that moment, the atmosphere shifts. Suddenly, people start asking questions. They start chasing after answers. They start feeling an emptiness they can't quite name. Think about the last time you saw this happen. Maybe it was at work, the colleague who suddenly stopped engaging in every meaningless argument. Maybe it was in your family, that one relative who, instead of fighting back, just became silent. Did you feel how uncomfortable it made everyone else? That silence was louder than any speech. That withdrawal had more weight than any outburst. Now imagine if you did the same. Imagine if, instead of always reacting immediately, you chose to wait. Instead of exploding in frustration, you stepped back. Instead of giving people the emotional response they expected, you gave them silence. Do you know what would happen? The game would change. The rules would no longer belong to them. They would belong to you. The truth is, we are trained from childhood to be available. Always answer quickly. Always pick up the phone. Always respond to the message. Always smile, even when we don't want to. Always say yes, even when every part of our body screams no. And what happens? We end up believing that being constantly available is a virtue. That it means we are kind, generous, good people. But here's the reality, being too available is not kindness. It is weakness disguised as virtue. When you are always available, people stop valuing your presence. Why? Because predictability kills respect. Think about it. The things we respect most in life are the things that are not easily given. We respect time because it's limited. We respect money because it takes effort. We respect health because it can disappear. But when it comes to people, if you are always there, always ready, always saying yes, you stop being seen as valuable. You become background noise. Let me put it this way, when you're too available, you become someone's emotional vending machine. They press a button, and you deliver. They want attention? They press. They want validation? They press. They want comfort? They press. And you give. And you give. And you give. Until one day you look in the mirror and realize you've been emptied out. But here's the thing no one tells you, silence changes that. Silence is not just absence of words. Silence is presence. It is power. It forces others to face themselves. When you refuse to react immediately, you're not weak, you're in control. You are no longer dancing to someone else's rhythm. You set the rhythm. And let's be honest. The people who get most irritated when you pull back, they are the ones who relied the most on your availability. They are the ones who needed you as their outlet, their comfort zone, their easy answer. And when you stop playing that role, they panic. Not because you hurt them, but because you stopped being predictable. Carl Jung once said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. Think about that for a moment. When your silence irritates someone, when your withdrawal makes them restless, what does it actually reveal? It reveals their dependence. It shows how much they needed you to keep their own balance. It shows that your availability wasn't kindness, it was fuel for their own comfort. And so the question becomes, how long will you keep fueling others while draining yourself? How long will you keep saying yes when inside you're screaming no? How long will you keep reacting like a puppet every time someone pulls the string of your emotions? I want you to really imagine this. Imagine a day when you decide not to answer right away. When you choose to take a breath before reacting. When you step back from the argument instead of stepping into it. How would people respond? At first, they might call you cold. They might call you arrogant. They might say, you've changed. But deep down, they will feel something they haven't felt in a long time, respect. Because silence commands attention. Withdrawal, when it comes from awareness and not from fear, is an act of strength. It is saying, I am no longer available for every game, every provocation, every emotional demand. And that is exactly where transformation begins. You stop living like a predictable machine and start living like a free human being. You stop reacting and start choosing. You stop being pulled by others and start standing in your own center. So let me ask you this: when was the last time your silence spoke louder than your words? When was the last time you refused to be dragged into someone else's chaos? When was the last time you chose yourself instead of choosing to please? Because here's the truth: the day you stop being always available, everything changes. The day you choose silence over reaction, you break the pattern. And once that pattern breaks, you will see clearly who really values you and who only valued your availability. This is not about turning your back on the world. It's about turning toward yourself. It's about realizing that your energy is not infinite, that your presence is precious, that your silence can be stronger than 1,000 arguments. And if you have the courage to practice this, to step back, to stay quiet, to stop being predictable, you will discover something extraordinary. The world does not collapse when you are not available, but the people who try to control you do. And that's when you will understand, silence is not weakness. Silence is sovereignty. Think about this: what really happens the day you decide not to answer right away? The moment you don't pick up the phone, don't reply to the text, don't rush to explain yourself, don't play the role everyone expects from you, something fascinating occurs. The room shifts. People get nervous. The silence becomes louder than words. Suddenly, those who thought they owned your time and your emotions realize they don't. And that's the very point. Being unavailable is not about running away from the world. It's not about ghosting or cutting people out of your life. It's about changing the game. It's about showing that your presence is not an endless resource to be consumed at will. It's about reminding others, and most importantly yourself, that you are not here to be everyone's emergency button. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves." Now pause and reflect on this. When you pull back, when you stop being predictable, who gets irritated? Who panics? Who suddenly tries harder to provoke you, to squeeze a reaction out of you? That reaction doesn't reveal anything about you. It reveals them. It shows how much of their balance was built on your constant availability. Let's make this practical. Imagine a colleague at work who is used to dumping their problems on you every day. You listen, you advise, you comfort, even when it drains you. Then one day, you stop. You don't rush to answer. You remain silent. What happens? They get anxious. They push harder. Maybe they even accuse you of being selfish. But the truth is, they're not angry because you changed. They're angry because you stopped playing the role they scripted for you. Or think about family dynamics. Maybe you're the one everyone calls when there's drama. You pick up at 2 a.m. You drive across town. You fix problems you never created. And because you always say yes, they assume you always will. But the day you say no, the day you choose silence, the energy flips. They don't just lose your reaction. They lose the power they had over you. And here's the paradox: the moment you set boundaries, people accuse you of being distant, cold, even arrogant. But is that really true? Or is it simply that your silence forces them to face something they've been avoiding, their own responsibility, their own emptiness, their own need to control? Your unavailability becomes a mirror. And not everyone is ready to look into that mirror. Let me ask you this: why do you think manipulative people push so hard when you step back? Because silence ruins their script. They thrive on your emotional reactions. They know exactly which buttons to press to get a rise out of you. And as long as you play along, they win. But when you stop reacting, when you refuse to dance to the same rhythm, the script falls apart. That's why they fight it. That's why they call you names. That's why they make drama. But here's the deeper truth: your unavailability is not rejection. It is revelation. It reveals who actually values you and who only valued your constant response. It shows you the difference between people who love you for who you are and people who only need you for what you provide. Being unavailable doesn't mean you disappear. It means you show up on your own terms. It means your presence has weight because it's not guaranteed. It means that when you choose to speak, people listen because they know you don't waste words. When you choose to act, people notice because they know you don't act just to please. And yes, this shift will make some people uncomfortable. But that discomfort is not a sign that you're wrong. It's proof that you're growing. It's proof that you're breaking patterns. It's proof that you've stopped being predictable. Think of it like this: if your phone buzzes 24/7 and you answer every single time, people treat you like background noise. But if you stop, if you let the phone ring, if you choose when to engage, suddenly your attention becomes valuable. Suddenly, people realize it's not guaranteed. And value always rises when it's no longer taken for granted. So, ask yourself, who in your life truly deserves your availability? Who has earned your presence? And who has only been using your predictability as a crutch? The answers to those questions might surprise you. Because here's the reality: most people don't want you. They want your reactions. They want your validation. They want your comfort. But when you stop providing those on demand, they're forced to face their own shadows. And that's when masks fall. That's when you see people clearly. And maybe that's the gift of unavailability. Not just the energy you save, not just the peace you gain, but the clarity you finally receive about who stands with you and who was only standing on you. So I challenge you, try it. Just once. Don't reply right away. Don't justify. Don't explain. Stay silent. Watch what happens. Watch who respects it. Watch who can't handle it. And then you'll see the truth: your unavailability is not weakness. It's power. And once you learn how to wield it, you will never go back to being everyone's puppet again. Let's be honest. Somewhere along the way, you were taught that being always available was a virtue. That the good person, the reliable friend, the caring partner, the dedicated employee, is the one who answers immediately, who says yes before thinking, who never lets a message sit unread, who never says no. And maybe you believed it. Maybe you still do. Because the world rewards people pleasing, at least on the surface. You got praised for being dependable. You got attention for always being there. But let me ask you, at the end of the day, how do you feel? Energized? Or empty? Respected? Or used? Here's the truth no one told you: excessive availability is not a strength. It's a trap. It's a subtle prison disguised as kindness. Because when you are always there, people stop seeing you. When you are always ready to answer, your presence becomes background noise. And what is too abundant eventually loses its value. Think about water in a desert versus water from the tap. In the desert, every drop is precious. At home, you let gallons run without noticing. That's how people treat your availability. The more you give it without limit, the less anyone respects it. And the cruel irony? The more you are available, the less you are valued. Because human nature takes for granted what is always there. Nobody treasures what they don't have to earn. But let's go deeper. Why do you stay so available? Why do you feel guilty if you don't reply right away? Why do you say yes when every part of you is screaming no? It's not because you're weak. It's because you've been conditioned. Since childhood, you've been trained to believe that your worth lies in serving others. That your role is to keep peace, to fix problems, to smooth things over, to be the one who never disappoints. And so, you've built a life around immediate reactions. You sacrifice your peace to avoid conflict. You abandon your own needs to hold on to people who were never really holding on to you. And with every forced yes, with every rushed reply, with every explanation you didn't owe, you chip away a little piece of yourself. What's the cost? Fatigue. Resentment. That quiet frustration you can't even explain. And here's the part no one wants to admit: the people who demand your constant availability don't truly want you. They want what you provide: validation, comfort, attention, distraction. But when you finally stop, when you finally set boundaries, when you finally say, "Not today," those same people accuse you of being cold. They get irritated. They try to guilt you. Not because you've changed, but because you stopped being useful on their terms. Let me give you an image. Imagine you're the emotional vending machine in someone's life. They push a button, and you deliver comfort, advice, presence. Again and again. But one day, the machine doesn't respond. They shake it, they kick it, they get angry. Why? Because they never saw the machine as alive in the first place. They only saw it as a tool. That's the danger of constant availability. You turn yourself into an object, predictable, functional, replaceable. And once people see you that way, they stop respecting the human behind the responses. Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted, to be loved, to be recognized. You tell people it's fine when you're drowning. You reply instantly even when you're exhausted. You over-explain, defend, and justify, as if you owe the world proof of your goodness. But the more you live inside that mask, the more you disappear from your own stage. And let's be clear, this isn't just about others. It's about you. Because every time you make yourself endlessly available, you abandon yourself. You give away your energy as if it were infinite, when in truth it is the most limited resource you own. So here's the turning point: availability is not the same as love. Being present all the time does not guarantee connection. In fact, it often destroys it. Because real love, real respect, real friendship require boundaries. They require scarcity. They require a choice. So I ask you, who truly deserves your time? Who has earned the right to your presence, your listening, your energy? And who is simply pressing your buttons because they know you'll always respond? It's time to face this. Every yes you give without meaning it is a no to yourself. Every rushed reply is a piece of your peace traded away. Every time you justify your silence, you're teaching the world that you owe them parts of you that are not theirs to take. And when you finally stop, when you say no, when you delay the reply, when you choose your peace first, don't be surprised when people resist. That's not a sign you're wrong. It's a sign that you've stopped being predictable. It's a sign that the emotional vending machine has come alive. And once you realize this, you'll never go back. Because you'll understand that your presence has value only when it's chosen, not when it's demanded. The strange thing about an inner awakening is that it never unfolds like a Hollywood script. You expect the light bulb moment to solve everything once and for all, but in reality, the experience of what we might call psychophoria, that surge of spiritual euphoria, comes and goes like an unpredictable tide. One day you feel like you are standing on top of a mountain, breathing in the thin, pure air of clarity. The very next day, you're back in the valley, stuck in traffic, annoyed by bills, distracted by 1,000 little irritations. At first, that feels like a failure. You think, if I touched something so true, why can't I hold on to it forever? But the truth is, it was never meant to be permanent. It comes in waves for a reason, to remind you, again and again, that growth is not a straight, perfectly paved road. It's a winding path full of twists, dips, and stretches of fog where you can't see more than a few feet ahead. What matters is not how long that moment of light stays with you, but what it leaves behind. Even a flicker of insight can change the course of your life if you let it. Think of it like a spark in the dark. You don't need an endless flame to move forward, you just need to remember that the spark is real and possible. That memory keeps you from sinking back into total darkness. That's why people who have even a small glimpse of what's beyond their comfort zone often can't go back to who they were before. They may try to bury themselves in old habits, hide behind routines, or silence the discomfort with noise and distraction, but deep inside they know too much now. They've seen that life is bigger, stranger, and more expansive than they ever believed. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. This shift begins to change how you perceive everything around you. Suddenly the promises of quick fixes, self-help hacks, 30-day challenges, guaranteed formulas for happiness ring hollow. You realize those are just band-aids on deeper wounds. You stop chasing dopamine rushes disguised as solutions. Instead, you start to value slower rhythms, steady progress, honest conversations, tiny victories nobody else even notices. You begin to sense that the real work of becoming yourself has nothing to do with achieving some shiny external goal and everything to do with removing the masks you've been wearing. That's the uncomfortable part. Psychophoria doesn't just hand you joy, it strips away the protective layers you've carefully built. The polite smiles, the fake confidence, the distractions you use to avoid being alone with yourself, they all begin to crumble. And when they fall away, what's left is raw, vulnerable, and at times even painful. Facing yourself without those masks is like standing in front of a mirror under harsh light. You see not just your strengths, but your insecurities, your regrets, your unhealed wounds. At first, it feels unbearable. Many people at this stage turn back. They convince themselves it was just a phase or a mood. But deep down, the seed of awareness is still alive. And it waits. This is where the real challenge begins. Because it's always easier to crawl back into the comfort of the familiar, even if the familiar is slowly suffocating you. It's easier to settle for good enough than to face the risk of growth. But the hard truth is that good enough eventually turns into numbness. You wake up one day realizing you're alive but not truly living. The routines that once kept you safe now feel like chains. And that's when the memory of that earlier spark returns, whispering that there's something more if you're willing to lean into the uncertainty. Uncertainty, in fact, is not the enemy, it's the birthplace of transformation. Every real change in life begins on shaky ground, on the edge of the cliff where fear and possibility meet. That edge is terrifying, yes, but it's also where you finally understand that comfort zones are prisons disguised as safe havens. To step beyond them means risking failure, rejection, loss, but it also means opening the door to freedom, authenticity, and depth. The paradox is that you can't have one without the other. You can't have the joy of true growth without passing through the discomfort of shedding your old skin. Here's the irony, we often think that once we've figured it out, life will get easier. But real awakening makes life more intense, not less. You feel more deeply, hurt more deeply, love more deeply. Ordinary things suddenly take on extraordinary weight, a conversation with a stranger, a quiet walk in the park, a difficult goodbye. You see connections where you once saw only coincidences. And while that can feel overwhelming, it's also the start of living fully. It's the kind of living where you stop asking, "What do I get out of this?" and start asking, "What can I give?" And yet, even in that, there's struggle. The world does not automatically applaud your growth. Friends may not understand why you've changed. Family might resist your new boundaries. Society will still try to sell you shortcuts and distractions. That's why so many people feel lonely in the early stages of transformation. They realize they no longer fit neatly into the old roles, but they haven't yet found the community or relationships that match their new values. This loneliness isn't a mistake, it's part of the passage. Think of it as the wilderness between who you were and who you're becoming. It's not meant to last forever, but it must be crossed. The good news is that each step you take, even when shaky, builds resilience. You learn to hold steady when the ground beneath you shifts. You discover that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward in spite of it. And you realize that failure, rather than being a shameful end, is actually proof that you're pushing beyond the known. Every stumble becomes a lesson. Every setback, a signal. Slowly, you learn that your worth was never tied to constant success, but to the willingness to keep showing up. So, yes, psychophoria doesn't last forever. The euphoria fades, the spark dims, the clarity blurs. But that doesn't mean it's gone. It means it's doing its work in silence, shaping you, calling you to rise again and again. And every time you rise, you become someone you barely recognize compared to who you were before. Stronger. More awake. More alive. That's the paradox of transformation. It's not about holding onto a single perfect moment. It's about learning to live in such a way that those moments keep returning, surprising you, humbling you, remaking you. The moment you realize transformation is not a destination but a way of living, everything shifts. For years you thought there would be a finish line, some ultimate point where all the pieces lock into place and you can finally say, "I've made it." But the truth you discover, after walking through the fire of awakening, is that there is no final arrival. Life is not a puzzle that ends once solved. Life is music. It's a melody that keeps unfolding, sometimes harmonious, sometimes dissonant, but always in motion. To be alive is not to finish but to keep listening, keep adjusting, keep playing your part in the larger song. And this realization is both liberating and terrifying. Liberating, because you stop chasing the illusion of perfection. Terrifying, because you understand there is no permanent safety net. Every day is a fresh risk. Every step forward could end in triumph or in stumbling again. But with each stumble, you discover something remarkable. You are not as fragile as you once thought. The ground may shake, storms may come, people may doubt you, but you learn how to bend without breaking. That resilience is the quiet gift of every struggle you've survived. Looking back, you begin to see that even the hardest chapters, the heartbreaks, the disappointments, the betrayals, were not detours but teachers. They burned away the illusions you clung to and forced you to face what was real. It doesn't mean the pain was fair or easy. But it does mean that it wasn't wasted. Nothing is wasted if it awakens you. Even the wounds you thought would never heal become part of your strength, because they remind you that survival is possible, that renewal is possible, that rising from ashes is possible. And as you carry these scars forward, something unexpected happens. Compassion takes root. You stop looking at others as competitors, enemies, or strangers, and you begin to see them as fellow travelers, each fighting invisible battles, each stumbling through their own wilderness. You realize the person who lashes out in anger may be drowning in fear. The one who judges you harshly may be wrestling with their own shame. The one who turns away may simply not know how to face their own reflection. This shift doesn't make you naive, it makes you human. It doesn't mean you allow abuse or accept injustice, but it does mean you understand that behind every sharp edge is a story. And that story deserves to be seen, even if only for a moment. That's when growth moves beyond self-improvement and becomes something deeper, self-transcendence. Self-improvement says, "I want to be better than I was yesterday." Self-transcendence says, "I want my life to mean more than just me." And in that moment, your search for purpose stops being about personal glory and starts being about contribution. You begin to ask, what can my struggles give to someone else? What can my story open in another heart? How can my presence make the space around me lighter, warmer, freer? It doesn't require grand gestures. You don't need to save the world or stand on a stage. Sometimes it's as simple as listening when no one else will, offering kindness without expecting a return, or daring to live authentically so that others feel permission to do the same. Every small act becomes a ripple. And the beauty of ripples is that they travel farther than you ever imagined. A single word of encouragement can echo in someone's life for decades. A single act of courage can inspire a chain reaction you'll never see. The irony is that in the pursuit of self-development, you thought you were trying to build yourself up. But in the end, you realize it's about breaking yourself open. Not to become weaker, but to let more light through the cracks. To stop hiding behind armor and to start living with a bare, unguarded heart. That vulnerability feels dangerous, but it's also magnetic. People are not drawn to perfection, they are drawn to authenticity. They are not healed by your image of strength, they are healed when they see your scars and realize they're not alone in theirs. This is where the circle completes. The spark of psychophoria that once lit up your path for a fleeting moment has now become a quiet flame inside you. It no longer needs to blaze wildly, it simply needs to burn steadily. And as it burns, it guides you through the uncertainties, through the loneliness, through the constant pull of distraction. You carry it into every new challenge, every new relationship, every unknown chapter. And you realize, the point was never to hold onto the spark, it was to become the flame. At this stage, life doesn't get easier, but it gets richer. The highs are still high, the lows are still low, but they no longer define you. You stop clinging to the idea that happiness is a permanent state. Instead, you discover something sturdier than happiness: meaning. Happiness comes and goes with circumstances, but meaning stays, even in hardship. Meaning is what lets you endure suffering without losing yourself. Meaning is what makes even the smallest day feel sacred. Meaning is what transforms ordinary existence into a life worth living. And maybe that's the final paradox. Growth is not about becoming someone new, but about uncovering who you were all along. Beneath the layers of fear, doubt, and performance was a self waiting to be remembered. A self that is not perfect, but whole. Not invincible, but resilient. Not flawless, but free. You don't need to chase after some distant version of yourself. You need only to return to the one that's been waiting patiently beneath the noise. So, the journey ends where it began, with you. But not the you who was asleep, numbed by routine and terrified of risk. It ends with the awakened you, the one who has walked through fire and rain, who has tasted both despair and wonder, who has fallen 100 times and risen 101. That you doesn't need to shout for validation. That you doesn't need to chase every fleeting thrill. That you doesn't need to prove anything. Because that you has learned the quiet, radical truth: growth begins where comfort zone ends, and it never ends. And in that realization lies the greatest gift. Not certainty. Not control. But freedom. Freedom to stumble, to rise, to fail, to begin again. Freedom to live a life that is not measured by achievements but by authenticity. Freedom to step forward every day knowing you are unfinished, imperfect, and still enough. Because in the end, that is the only measure that matters, not how polished your life looks from the outside, but how true it feels on the inside. That is what it means to become who you were meant to be. The first thing you notice when you finally step away from the noise of the world is not peace but fear. Silence feels heavy. Emptiness echoes. The absence of voices, the absence of distractions, the absence of constant input creates a space that feels almost unbearable at first. For years, maybe decades, you were conditioned to believe that being alone meant being less valuable, less wanted, less alive. So when solitude greets you, it feels like rejection. Like exile. Like punishment. But then something surprising begins to happen. The longer you sit with the silence, the less threatening it becomes. At first it feels like staring into a void, but gradually the void transforms into a mirror. And in that mirror you begin to see yourself, not the roles you play, not the masks you wear, not the expectations that weigh on you, but the raw, unfiltered presence of your own being. It's uncomfortable because it's real. But it's also liberating, because in that rawness lies truth. Solitude cleanses. It strips away the noise that drowns out your inner voice. Without the constant pull of opinions, without the endless scroll of comparisons, without the pressure to perform, you finally hear the whisper that has been buried beneath it all. That whisper is not glamorous, not dramatic, not Instagram-worthy. But it is yours. And for the first time, you realize how starved you've been for your own company. In solitude, you learn the difference between loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness is a wound. It says, I am incomplete. I need someone to fill me. Aloneness is a source. It says, I am whole, and from this wholeness I can connect with others without losing myself. When you cross that bridge, solitude ceases to be a prison and becomes a sanctuary. It no longer drains you, it restores you. It no longer punishes you, it purifies you. At first, it still feels strange. You might notice the urge to fill the silence with background noise, with busyness, with shallow distractions. But over time, you realize that silence itself has a texture. It holds a depth that no distraction can replicate. The quiet reveals patterns you were blind to. It reveals the hidden motivations behind your choices. It reveals where you've been running in circles, mistaking movement for progress. And in that revelation, a new kind of strength takes root, the strength of self-awareness. Solitude sharpens you. Without the constant feedback loop of others, you learn to rely on your own judgment. Without applause, you discover whether your actions are truly aligned with your values. Without approval, you learn to stand on the foundation of your own convictions. This is not easy, because validation is addictive. But when you break that addiction, you unlock something far more enduring: self-respect. And with self-respect comes self-sovereignty. You stop living as a reaction to others. You stop bending your identity to fit into molds that were never made for you. You stop seeking permission to exist on your own terms. In solitude, you reclaim authorship of your story. Every decision becomes less about compliance and more about creation. Every day becomes less about performance and more about alignment. Yes, solitude costs you. You may lose people along the way, those who were attached not to your true self but to the mask you used to wear. You may lose approval from those who prefer you predictable, convenient, and easy to categorize. You may even lose the comfort of belonging to a crowd, because crowds rarely reward individuality. But in exchange, you gain something priceless: you find yourself. You find that your worth was never tied to how many people clap when you speak. You find that your identity is not dependent on who chooses to stay. You find that you can stand in a room empty of applause and still feel full. Because what fills you now is not external validation but internal integration. You are no longer divided against yourself. You are whole. And that wholeness creates a different kind of freedom. Not the shallow freedom of doing whatever you want whenever you want, but the deeper freedom of being untethered from fear of misunderstanding. You realize that true freedom is not about being universally liked or universally understood. True freedom is being willing to be misunderstood, unpredictable, even dismissed, and still remain true to yourself. The world doesn't always know what to do with someone who is whole. People may project their fears onto you. They may call your detachment arrogance, your independence coldness, your authenticity rebellion. But that's the price of being real. Not everyone will celebrate you, because your very existence challenges their illusions. The question is, will you shrink back into conformity to keep the peace, or will you choose your peace, even at the cost of being misunderstood? This is the final test of solitude. Can you remain rooted in yourself even when the crowd walks away? Can you let go of the need to explain yourself endlessly? Can you accept that mystery, unpredictability, and even contradiction are part of being fully human? If you can, then you have crossed from survival into freedom. Because freedom is not being untouchable, it is being unshakable. Freedom is not being admired, it is being authentic. Freedom is not being flawless, it is being fearless enough to stand whole in a fragmented world. And in this rebirth through solitude, you are no longer chasing an identity. You are no longer pretending to be what others expect. You are no longer afraid of silence, because silence has become your teacher, your ally, your anchor. You step into the world not as a seeker of approval but as a giver of presence. And that presence radiates something people can feel, even if they cannot name it. They may not understand you, but they will sense your wholeness. So here is the invitation, whispered from the depths of solitude to the heart of anyone who is listening. Are you ready? Are you ready to stop running from silence? Are you ready to let go of the masks and meet yourself face to face? Are you ready to choose peace, even if it costs you popularity, predictability, and understanding? Because if you are, then you will find a kind of freedom that cannot be taken away. A freedom that does not depend on applause or approval. A freedom that does not break when storms come. A freedom that is not given by the world, and therefore cannot be stolen by the world. True rebirth does not happen when life becomes easier. True rebirth happens when you realize you no longer need life to be easy in order to feel whole. So I ask you again, directly, as you sit here in the quiet after all the noise of this journey, are you ready to choose your peace, even if it costs you being misunderstood? Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. I know your time is valuable. If this message spoke to you, if it gave you even one moment of clarity or peace, I'd be grateful if you'd let me know. A simple like, a comment with your thoughts, or subscribing to the channel helps this community grow, and it helps more people who might need these words to find them. Share your reflections below, I do read them. I'll see you in the next chapter. Until then, take care of your peace.